They say the mountains are quiet. That's a lie. The mountains are full of noise, but it's the noise of things that don't want to be heard. The shift of rock under a mile of earth, the whisper of the high wind shearing the pines, the metallic crunch of your own boots on frosted gravel that sounds like a gunshot in the pre-dawn dark. I know that sound better than I know my own name. I've been running search and rescue, SAR, operations in this high country for 20 years. I've found bodies frozen solid, bodies mangled by falls, and bodies eaten by bears. Those cases, they hurt, but they make sense. Gravity, hunger, stupidity, they're predictable enemies. But then there are the others. The ones that leave you sitting in the truck at base camp, staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee, wondering if you're losing your mind. The ones we call the clean disappearances. The one that sticks with me the most, the one that started turning my hair gray for real, was Elias Vance. This was 6 years back, deep in the Montana wilderness, where the trails are little more than suggestions. Vance wasn't some city tourist who missed a turn. He was former Ranger Regiment, a survival instructor, the kind of man who could live off pine needles and spite for a month. He'd signed in for a 7-day solo traverse. Day 10, his wife called. Day 12, the park superintendent authorized the full SAR mobilization. We knew quickly he hadn't been injured. If Vance was hurt, he'd find a way to signal. He'd leave a marker. He was trained to survive. The first 4 days of the search were the usual grind. We flew grid patterns over the canyons, the rotors jopping the thin air. On the ground, we moved in staggered lines, sweeping through the dense lodgepole forests. The air was already turning cold, the kind of cold that steals the moisture from your lungs and makes your joints ache. You could smell the coming winter, a sharp, sterile scent mixed with the overwhelming odor of damp earth and diesel from the trackers' four-wheelers. We found the campsite on day 5. It was tucked into a clearing near a frozen creek bed, maybe 3 miles off the main designated trail. Even from a distance, something was wrong. A lost man's camp is usually chaos, rations spilled, a half-dug fire pit, maybe a ripped tent flap from a desperate struggle against the elements or an animal. Vance's camp was immaculate. The 2-man tent was pitched perfectly, guy lines taut, stakes driven deep. The small fire pit was cold, but the remaining wood was stacked neatly beside it, ready for the next burn. My squad leader, Rodriguez, knelt by the fire pit, running his gloved hand over the gray ash. "Dead maybe 48 hours, Sarge," he muttered. "No sign of a struggle, no animal tracks that matter." I didn't look at the fire. I was staring at the tent entrance. Outside the flap, lined up side by side, toes pointing out, were Elias Vance's heavy-duty, waterproof leather hiking boots. They were clean, almost polished, resting on a flat piece of slate. I felt the first prickle of true fear, the kind that doesn't come from danger, but from the violation of logic. Why would a man who knows these mountains leave his boots outside the tent in near-freezing temperatures unless he wasn't planning on putting them back on? I unzipped the flaps slowly. The nylon zipper made a loud rasping sound. Inside, the horror deepened. Vance's sleeping bag was unrolled on the ground pad. It was empty. His backpack, a military-grade internal frame pack that probably cost more than my first car, was zipped tight and leaned against the far wall of the tent. His water filter, his survival knife, his map case, all accounted for, all placed exactly where they should be. And then, I saw the clothes. Stacked neatly on the center of the sleeping bag was his entire outer layer. The heavy wool hiking pants, folded along the creases, the thermal fleece jacket, zipped up and laid flat, his thick synthetic undershirt, stacked like laundry day. And on top of the stack, his socks. 2 pairs of expensive merino wool hiking socks, rolled together, toe to heel, sitting perfectly centered on the pile of clothes. I stood there, the cold air rushing into the tent, chilling the sweat on my back. Rodriguez came up behind me, looked inside, and swore under his breath in Spanish. "What the hell is this, Sarge? He stripped down for a swim in the creek?" "No," I said, my voice sounding flat and distant. "He stripped down because he was leaving." Vance was gone, but he had left behind every single thing a professional needs to survive in the high country. He had stripped down to his thin base layer, maybe just his underwear, we couldn't be sure.
and walked away from a perfectly established secure camp. Why? The temperature was dropping fast. Hypothermia sets in within hours up here. A man like Vance doesn't commit suicide by exposure by meticulously folding his socks first. That is not panic. That is not an accident. That is ceremony. We spent the next week combing a 5-mile radius, searching for a man who was now essentially barefoot and naked in the wilderness. We found nothing. No footprints on the frozen ground that weren't ours. No blood, no sign of struggle. The official report eventually closed the case as presumed fatal exposure, body unrecoverable. But the evidence, the folded clothes, the organized camp, was scrubbed from the public file. It was too bizarre. It scared the tourists. But it didn't scare the SAR veterans. It confirmed our worst fear, that this wasn't an isolated incident.
I'd heard whispers before Vance. Cases from Yosemite, from the Rockies, experienced hikers, sometimes solo, sometimes in pairs, who disappear mid-trail, leaving behind evidence that defies rational explanation. There was the case of the geologist in Arizona 3 years earlier. He vanished from his car parked at the trailhead. Inside the locked vehicle, they found his wallet, keys, phone, and a half-eaten sandwich. But his tent, sleeping bag, and hiking boots were gone. He took the survival gear, but left the identification and means of communication. Why ditch the ID but keep the boots? Or the woman in Oregon who was found 5 miles from her campsite, sitting upright against a tree trunk, dead from exposure. She was wearing all her clothes, but her backpack was completely empty. All her rations, water, and emergency radio were scattered on the forest floor around her, laid out in a perfect circle, like stones in a ritual. She hadn't tried to use the radio. She hadn't eaten the food. She had just sat down and waited. These weren't mistakes. They were choices made under duress, or maybe choices made under influence. After the Vance case, I was transferred to the West Coast, to the Sierras. The landscape changed. Taller peaks, deeper snowpack, granite everywhere, but the job and the dread remained the same. I tried to forget Vance, focusing on the everyday reality of twisted ankles and lost Boy Scouts. Then, last fall, we got the call that brought the metallic taste of fear back into my mouth. It was October. The first heavy snow was threatening. The target location was deep in the John Muir Wilderness, a place so remote you needed a helicopter to properly start a search. The missing man was named Leo Kincaid, 62 years old, retired engineer, known for his meticulous planning. He was hiking the JMT, the John Muir Trail, famous for its beauty and its unforgiving altitude. He was supposed to meet his daughter at the end of the trail 3 weeks ago. He never showed. We mobilized fast. We had maybe 72 hours before the snow closed the high passes entirely. We established base camp at Devil's Post Pile, and the first chopper run took me and 3 other guys, Rodriguez had transferred with me, up to the last known checkpoint near Thousand Island Lake. The air up there was thin and biting. The granite peaks looked like teeth tearing at the sky. The silence was heavy, not peaceful, but absolute, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Kincaid's last recorded check-in was at a small ranger station near the lake. He was cheerful, well-supplied, and reporting ideal trail conditions. We started sweeping south from the lake, following the trail. We moved slow, covering every switchback, every patch of scrub pine. The sun was low, throwing long blue shadows that hid everything and played tricks on your eyes. We found the spot on the afternoon of the second day. It wasn't a camp this time. It was just a stretch of trail near a massive boulder field, maybe 2 miles past the last signpost. Rodriguez spotted it first. He stopped dead, raising a gloved hand. "Hold up, Sarge, look." At the base of a towering granite slab, protected from the wind, sat Kincaid's backpack. It was a bright orange external frame model, impossible to miss. It was sitting upright, resting against the rock, exactly centered. My stomach twisted. This was too neat. We approached cautiously. The pack was heavy, full of gear. We checked the area for signs of a struggle. Nothing. No scuff marks, no broken branches, no blood. Just the pack, waiting. I knelt down and unzipped the top flap. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. Rations, stove, fuel, first aid kit, all present. Kincaid had clearly not been ambushed or robbed. Then I found the note. It was tucked into the map sleeve, folded twice. It wasn't a note to his daughter or a plea for help. It was a single page from his trail journal. The handwriting was Kincaid's, neat, almost obsessive in its precision. But the content. I read it out loud, the words echoing strangely against the silence of the high country. The humming is constant now.
It's not the wind. It's coming from the stone. I can feel the vibration through my teeth. It needs the layer removed. It needs the offering. Rodriguez looked at me, his eyes wide above his dust mask. What in God's name is that? It's gibberish, I said, but my hands were shaking as I refolded the note. It wasn't gibberish. It was the same kind of forced internal logic that Vance folded his socks before walking into a blizzard. We searched the immediate vicinity. Kincaid was not in the boulder field. We checked the creek below. Nothing. But then one of the younger guys, Miller, called out from about 30 yards up the trail. "Sarge, I found the boots, but..." We scrambled up to him. Miller was standing next to a small, isolated patch of manzanita scrub. There, sitting side by side on a flat stone, were Leo Kincaid's expensive, high-ankle hiking boots. They were clean, laces neatly tied. And right next to the boots, resting on a bed of pine needles, was his entire outfit. Fleece, pants, thermal underwear, folded, neatly stacked. We had found another clean disappearance. The dread was a physical weight now, pressing down on my chest. I looked up at the granite peaks, silent and massive, feeling like I was being watched by something that had no eyes.
We knew Kincaid was now somewhere in the high country, stripped down to nothing, likely dead from exposure within hours of writing that note. But why the ritual? Why the need to organize the gear? I focused on the boots. They were the most important clue. They knew the trail. "Miller," I ordered, my voice sharp and tight. "Check the boots. I want to know if there's any dirt, any sign of wear that doesn't belong." Miller picked one up, turning it over slowly. It was heavy, solid. "No, Sarge, they're clean. Standard wear pattern." He paused. "Wait, there's something inside." He reached into the left boot and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was Kincaid's personal GPS unit, the kind that tracks your exact location and sends satellite messages. It wasn't just placed inside. It was jammed down into the toe of the boot, wedged in tight. I took the unit. It was powered off. I flicked the power switch. The small LCD screen blinked to life. The battery was nearly dead, but the log was still accessible. I scrolled through the location data. Kincaid had been moving steadily south along the trail, making excellent time. He stopped exactly at this boulder field 4 days ago. He stayed here for 3 hours. Then the GPS moved again. But the movement was strange. It moved only 150 feet west into the densest part of the boulder field. Then it stopped, and stayed stopped for 2 hours. Then the unit showed a final sharp movement. It moved 30 feet back toward the trail, the exact distance from the rock face to where Miller found the boots. The timestamp matched the moment the unit was powered off. Kincaid had walked 150 feet into the rocks, stayed there, then returned to the trail, tucked the GPS into his boot, stripped, folded his clothes, wrote the note about the humming, and walked away into the wilderness. He had walked into the rocks, seen something or heard something, and then returned to prepare himself for whatever came next.
The temperature dropped another 5 degrees. The wind started to whine through the crevices in the granite. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a low, resonant drone, a humming. I looked at the boulder field, a chaotic maze of gray stone, deep shadows, and crevices large enough to swallow a truck. "We go into the rocks," I told Rodriguez. "Grid pattern, tight. Kincaid went in there. We need to know why he came back." We spent the rest of the afternoon crawling through the field. The granite was cold and slick. We checked every overhang, every dark corner. The air pressure felt wrong, heavy, like breathing underwater. Every footstep echoed. We found nothing human. No torn fabric, no blood, no footprints that weren't our own. The rocks were sterile, ancient, and silent, except for that faint, underlying resonance that I was now sure I could feel in my own bones. Just as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, Rodriguez yelled. He wasn't far, maybe 20 yards away, deep in a narrow fissure between 2 massive slabs of granite. I scrambled toward him. He was staring down into a hole, a tight, dark gap in the rock that looked like a chimney. The air coming out of that hole wasn't cold. It was damp and smelled metallic, like ozone and wet iron. "What is it?" I whispered. Rodriguez didn't answer right away. He just pointed a trembling finger down into the darkness. "Look at the stone, Sarge, right here." I looked where he pointed. The surface of the granite around the opening of the chimney was smooth, polished by centuries of wind and water.
But etched into the stone, scored deep into the granite, were marks. Not letters, not symbols. They were parallel lines, perfectly straight, running vertically into the opening. Dozens of them. They looked like scratch marks, but too uniform, too deep to be made by a man's fingernails or even a knife. They looked like someone had dragged something heavy, something metallic, vertically down the rock face, over and over, until the lines were grooves. And those grooves were fresh. The mineral dust was still clinging to the edges. "He did this," Rodriguez breathed, his voice barely audible. "Kincaid did this. He was here, scraping the rock." "With what?" I asked. We hadn't found anything sharp missing from his pack. Rodriguez shined his tactical light down the chimney. The beam vanished into the absolute blackness. "I don't know, Sarge, but look closer at the edges of the grooves." I leaned in, feeling the metallic dampness on my face. The edges of the grooves weren't just dusty, they contained something else, something dark and organic. I reached out and touched the groove nearest me. I brought my finger back to the light. It was dried blood, human blood. Kincaid hadn't been scraping the rock with a tool. He had been scraping it with his hands, or maybe his teeth, trying desperately to gouge those lines into the stone. And then he walked back to the trail, folded his clothes, and walked away. We called for extraction. The light was failing, and the temperature was plummeting. We couldn't safely descend that chimney with rappelling gear and proper backup, and the snow was coming. As the helicopter approached, its sound fighting against the rising wind, I stood by the edge of the boulder field, looking back at the spot where the boots and the folded clothes lay. I knew with absolute certainty that Elias Vance and Leo Kincaid had not simply gotten lost. They had been given an ultimatum, or perhaps they had been compelled by something ancient and cold that lived in the silence of the high country. They had been forced to prepare themselves to leave the offering of their gear and their identification before walking out of the world. And whatever it was still there, humming in the stone. We had to go back. We had to go down the chimney. I just had to convince the Park Service that we weren't chasing ghosts, but something that left perfectly folded socks and deep, bloodied grooves in solid granite. I fought the brass for 18 hours. They wanted to wait for spring, citing the risk of avalanche in the coming storm. The superintendent, a pencil pusher named Hayes, kept repeating the official line. "Presumed exposure, Sergeant. We found the gear. He stripped in the cold. It's sad, but it's closed." I didn't argue the point about the clothes. I didn't mention the humming or the forced logic of the folded socks. I just slammed the photos of the granite grooves down on his desk, the deep vertical scores, the way the mineral dust mixed with dried, dark blood. "This is not exposure, sir," I said, keeping my voice flat. "This is evidence of extreme duress. Kincaid was in that fissure for 2 hours, scraping the rock until he bled out. We have a potential hostage situation or a ritual site. If that snow hits, those marks are gone until July. We go back now." The word ritual was enough. It sounded crazy, but the blood was real. Hayes grudgingly gave us a 36-hour window, me, Rodriguez, and 2 other climbers. We packed light, focusing on rappelling gear, heavy-duty comms, and extra batteries for the lights. We flew out before dawn on day 3. The air was heavy and still, the color of bruised plums. The first flakes of snow were already starting to drift down as the chopper deposited us near the boulder field. The silence was immediate and profound once the rotors lifted away. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of anticipation. We moved quickly to the fissure. Rodriguez checked the anchor points while I rigged the main line. The metallic smell was stronger now, mixed with the sharp, sterile scent of ozone, like standing next to a faulty high-tension wire. "Comms check," I muttered into my headset. "Loud and clear, Sarge. I've got the belay. Go slow." I clipped in and swung my legs over the lip of the crevice. The granite here was colder than iron, and the scratches, Kincaid's final desperate act, were right at my face level. I could see the microscopic fragments of dried tissue clinging to the edges. I started the descent. The chimney was narrow, forcing me to rotate my body to avoid getting snagged. The rope grated loudly against the stone,
a sound that seemed to travel miles in the thin air. And then the humming started. It wasn't external. It didn't come from the air. It came from the rock itself, vibrating up the rope, through my harness, and into my skeleton. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a frequency you felt in your teeth and the marrow of your bones. It was the exact sound Kincaid had described, a constant, low drone, demanding attention. I dropped maybe 60 feet. The light from the surface was gone, swallowed by the twisting shaft. I shoned my tactical light down. It pierced the blackness, revealing a small opening, a chamber maybe 10 feet across. On the floor, I reported, my voice tight. Chamber secured. Lower me the rest of the way. I hit the floor with a soft thud. The air down here was unnaturally warm, dry, and smelled intensely of that metallic ozone. It felt like walking into a sealed vault.
I swept the beam around the chamber. It was rough-hewn, naturally formed, but the floor was strangely flat, covered in fine, pale dust. There was no sign of water or animal life. It was sterile. "I'm looking for Kincaid," I whispered over the comms. No visual on the subject. "Be careful, Sarge. We don't like that smell." I moved toward the center of the chamber. My boots crunched lightly on the dust. In the middle, there was a pile of small, flat stones, a crude, low altar, maybe a foot high. It looked like someone had arranged them with care. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the ritual. I approached slowly, holding the light steady. On top of the altar, there were two objects. The first was a piece of Kincaid's thermal base layer, the thin, gray synthetic fabric. It was folded into a precise square, sitting perfectly centered on the stone pile, the last thing he wore before walking out naked. The second object was small, dark, and dense. It sat right next to the folded fabric. It wasn't organic, but it wasn't natural granite either. It looked polished, almost like dark obsidian, but heavier. I knelt down, ignoring the metallic vibration surging through my knees. I reached out a gloved hand and carefully picked up the dark object. It was heavy, too heavy for its size. It had a strange concave curve on one side and was perfectly flat on the other. It wasn't a piece of the rock. It was shaped. As my fingers closed around it, the humming stopped. Instantly. The silence that followed was so absolute, so heavy, that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the chamber. I held the object close to the light, turning it over and over. It wasn't obsidian. It wasn't metal. It was bone. It had been carved, or perhaps ground down into this specific flat shape. And then I understood. The scratches on the granite, the blood, the note about the offering.
Kincaid hadn't been trying to escape the chimney. He had been trying to get this out. The grooves were not attempts to climb. They were the desperate, bloody effort of a man trying to score a piece of his own body, a finger bone, maybe a piece of his sternum, against the hard granite to shape the offering the mountain demanded. The horror wasn't that he was killed. The horror was that he was forced to participate in his own vanishing. He prepared his gear, stripped away his identity, and then, in that cold, vibrating cave, he paid the toll. The offering was complete. He was free to go. But where did he go? I looked around the chamber again. It was completely empty. No secondary passage, no body, no sign of what took him. He had paid, and then he simply ceased to be there. Just like Vance, who meticulously folded his socks before walking away from the world. "Sarge, what happened?" The noise stopped. Rodriguez's voice crackled, full of tension. I looked at the piece of shaped bone in my hand, then at the neatly folded piece of cloth, an empty man's final laundry. "We found the offering, Rodriguez," I said, my voice hoarse. "No sign of Kincaid. We are extracting now. Bring up the line." I placed the bone back on the altar, next to the folded cloth. I didn't want that thing in my pack. I didn't want the silence to stop again. As I started climbing, the bone fragment still heavy in my mind, I realized the terrifying pattern. The mountains don't want the gear. They want the ritual. They want the acknowledgement. They want the human to shed everything that makes him civilized, the boots, the clothes, the ID, and then leave a piece of himself behind for the stone. We were back at base camp before the heavy snow hit. Hayes came down from the headquarters, demanding a full report. I told him we found the source of the scratching. a small, highly localized geological stress fracture explaining the ozone smell and the metallic sound. I reported finding the final piece of clothing, suggesting Kincaid had gone into a state of acute psychosis and committed self-mutilation before succumbing to hypothermia. I didn't mention the folded cloth. I didn't mention the bone. The official report closed the file. Geological anomaly and presumed fatal exposure. Another clean disappearance. Filed away, sanitized for the public. I transferred out of SAR 6 months later. I couldn't look at a high peak anymore without hearing that low, expectant drone. I live in the city now, where the sounds are predictable. Sirens, horns, the roar of traffic. But sometimes late at night, when the city goes quiet, I look down at my own feet. I see my shoes sitting neatly by the door, and I feel a sudden, overwhelming urge to take off my socks, roll them up just so, and place them perfectly centered on my bed. It's the mountain reminding me. It knows my name, and it knows that when the humming starts again, I too will be asked for the offering. And I wonder, like Vance and Kincaid before me, if I will have the strength to refuse the ceremony, or if I will simply fold my clothes and walk away.